Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Utopia Theatre Creative Hub series. My name is Karishma Bhagani. I am a director, dramaturg, producer, calling in today from Mombasa, Kenya. Really thrilled and excited to be a part of this series because it's just brought us together on the continent and globally in a very different way. So glad to be in conversation with all of you. It's my pleasure and honor to be a part of this, and I'd like to take a minute to introduce Lesedi Job, who is going to be the person we're having a conversation with today. Hi, Lesedi.
Hi, Karishma. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you. Keeping my head above the water during the pandemic.
Yes. Tell us where you are right now. Where are you calling in from? What's the situation like over there?
Okay, so I am calling in from South Africa in Johannesburg, and we have reached level 2, so we can start traveling interprovincially. Cigarettes and alcohol had been banned, they've been unbanned, but by law, we're all required to wear a mask, hand sanitize as regularly as possible, and still allowed to, now we can visit our families, but only in groups of 10 and no big gatherings that are above 50. And theaters are open, but we're still trying to figure out how we start recreating shows to open up for just an audience of 50.
Yeah, this pandemic has really just taken the creative sector in each country by surprise. I feel like there's a lot of artists who are suffering, who don't have their productions and opportunities in the same way. How is it like for you actually in this moment? Are you feeling, I heard you mention with having your head above the water, and I'm wondering what it's like for the creative world for you. Are you managing to work? What's the story?
I think the greatest thing that I did for myself was to get into as many different aspects and departments of storytelling. So I not only work as a theater director and theater actress, I also work as a voiceover artist. So thank goodness, advertising is still alive and products are still being sold. And I've done a lot of work as a voiceover artist. But I think it has been challenging. We are all aware as the creative industry in South Africa that we are not supported as much as we need to be supported. There's a lot of artists that have been unemployed for the past 4 months, haven't earned a salary. But of course, when you get to that place of unemployment as an artist, you search inside and then start saying, okay, what stories would I like to tell in the near future? Who am I as the artist? What are the dreams that I still have that I haven't achieved? So I am looking at other plays that I still would like to direct, trying to make that possible. We don't know how the funding will come about, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying the idea of kind of diving in deeper and understanding who we are. I have had the pleasure of knowing you and meeting you multiple times over the last few years. We first met at KITF in 2018 when I was just blown away by the piece you brought, which was when Swallows Cry. And it's been so exciting for me to, have you as a mentor, as a friend, as a sister in the field to learn from. But for the benefit of all those watching our videos today, why don't you tell me, who are you, Lesedi? What do you do? What's this girl up to? Big existential questions. No pressure.
I am many things, but for the purpose of the Creative Hub, I am a 36-year-old South African Black female theater director and theater actress. I have worked in the South African industry for the past 12 years, and I've done television. As I mentioned, I work as a voice artist, but in terms of theater, or in terms of acting and directing, theater has been the place where I have found my voice and honed my voice.
And what does that mean for you? What does being able to tell your story in whatever way that you do mean for you? Like what is important for you in the work that you make?
Wow. I mean, I think firstly, I have to acknowledge that I am in a particularly privileged position within the South African theatre industry as a Black female who in the past 3 years became a director. So it means a lot for me to occupy that specific position within my industry, within my life. And I've also had the privilege of creating work not only independently, but in the mainstream institutions. I've had my productions on at the Market Theatre, as well as the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town. The Market Theatre is a theatre in Johannesburg that I think a lot of people know about as the theatre that holds a very rich history of being almost the birth of South African theatre in very many ways. The Baxter Theatre in Cape Town is linked to the university and is also a main theatre within the city of Cape Town. I've also had an opportunity to direct my work at Theatre on the Square. So it's a big thing for me, and it means a lot to me. Just to give you a little bit of context with regards to the Black female theatre director identity in South Africa, it is still a foreign, I don't want to say it's a foreign space. It is not dominated. The theatre director role by Black females is not dominated by Black women, or rather the director role is not dominated by Black women as much as it could have been in the past few years, or it should be. You know, we can't forget that we live in a country where the majority is Black. And it is important that we see Black people in these roles, you know. So it's really, and I mean, this has happened in the past 3 years for me. And in 2018, I won the Naledi Theatre Award for Best Director as a Black female. It has been won by a woman of color before, thank you. A female by the name of Jade Bowers. And if I'm not mistaken, she won the award either in 2016 or 2017. So considering that we became a democratic country in 1994, it really does mean that we are not seeing enough Black women within this role of being a director and being at the helm of the storytelling process, you know. So it's really, really important for me to occupy this position, and it means a lot to me. And I always acknowledge that it is a privilege and a luxury, and I often feel blessed to be within this position doing what I do.
Thank you for saying that. And, you know, I actually really find it interesting that you've spoken a bit about your journey, and I'm going to delve into that or ask a little bit more about that later on. But one thing that I found particularly interesting about what you've just said is that you've been independent since '94, and this is only when women of color are coming to the forefront. You know, I think across the African continent, not to overlay generalize, but this is a feeling that I've had, that there's this perception that South African theatre is 20 million steps ahead of everybody else, and closely followed by Nollywood, you know, and Nigeria. And Nollywood is a whole other, you know, it's the film industry. But, you know, coming from or being in East Africa, there's always this idea of, okay, as an African, if you made it to South Africa, then the success is there, you're here. So, I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey of how you got to the place you got to before you even stepped into directing. Where did you study? What did you learn? How did you embrace the career for yourself? You know, just contextually speaking, for me as an artist, you know, when I went to study abroad, that was a big question I had in my head, right? Like, what is the purpose of art on our continent? Why am I choosing to become an artist? And why am I going abroad to study? Are there not institutions here that I can? So I'd love to hear about your journey and progression.
So every time I think about my journey, I have to mention the fact that being an artist was not an option for me. And I think this might possibly cover this question around why there might not be as many Black female theatre directors, theatre producers, artistic directors within the South African industry. I had always had a passion for live performance. I wanted to be a singer. I could sing really well. I wanted to be an actress because I did acting in high school. But when it came to finishing my matric and going off to university and studying, going into the arts wasn't an option because my mother did not think that it would be a career that I would be able to sustain myself in. And all she knew of this industry were people who had come in and gone, and that's it. And couldn't even give me an example of a theater director or an actress that she went, this woman has been within this industry for however many years, and therefore you can do it. So for her, it was a thing that she was not going to allow me to go into because there was no security in it. Eventually, she got hip to the idea that I was unhappy doing anything else in my life other than following my dream and passion of the arts. And she eventually suggested that I go to Wits University and study music and drama. And after studying music and drama, I graduated and walked into a theater role as an actress. And luckily, I was directed by James Ngobo in The Lion and the Jewel in 2008. Small little role, but this play was performed at the State Theatre and the Market Theatre. The State Theatre being basically the state theatre within South Africa. So the fact that I graduated and walked into sort of a high stakes professional space allowed for me to be placed at the center of theater within South Africa, having, performing at the Market Theatre, performing at the State Theatre, working with James Ngobo, who is currently the artistic director of the Market Theatre. And I remember whilst I was studying in university, I'd always thought of becoming a theater director. I did a course. So this is the interesting thing. I think we still, and this is maybe I'm talking early noughties, 2004 to 2008, we could count the number of women who were directing in theater. We didn't know them, and I think it's not just Black women that don't have, it's not just that there are not enough Black women, there are not enough women in this role of being a theater director. So for me, essentially, what am I saying? You walk into a degree or you walk into university, all you know is you want to act and sing. Directing or producing is not anything that you think about because you've never seen it, you've never heard about it, you don't understand what it entails. But slowly but surely, as you study, you then work with a theater director and you discover what a role of a theater director is. And suddenly you have this thing inside of you that says, I'd like to become that. But then you go, in me wanting to become that, who do I look at to chart the course of my own journey? To say, before I become a theater director, these are the things that I need to do to get there. And so I looked around, and at the time, I think there was Nabo Mashiane and Waruna Siane as the two Black female theater directors that I knew of. And then, of course, Lara Foote, who's a female director, world-renowned theater director, and, Yael Faber. But there was still a part of me going, I don't know how to get there. So I figured I would have to make it up along the way. And the best thing I did for myself was to stay in theater. I figured if I'm going to become a theater director, or if I have a dream of becoming a theater director, I'm not going to become that by becoming a TV actress or becoming a film actress. Let me stay in theater and fully understand what theater entails and playing different roles over the years. So even when I became a theater director, I remember saying to myself, I might not know what theater directing is, but what I do know is theater, because I had been in a number of theater productions. I understood what Tech Week entails. I understood what it meant to be workshopping a theater production when a director comes to you with a new script and says, guys, in many ways, we're making this from scratch altogether. you know. So I think that was my journey. Yes, studying theater and getting an academic understanding of what makes theater. Then, of course, being in theatre productions whilst in university, which in many ways, the South African university theatre productions are at the level of a professional theatre production. When I moved into the industry professionally, the only thing that was lacking was another 2 weeks in a theatre run. I understood a tech week. I had been on a major stage, a main stage at a university that was also considered to be a professional theatre stage. So I could perform on that stage, and at that level, the only thing was missing was another 2 weeks in the run, because in university we only did 2-week runs. And then from there it was going, to become a theatre director, what does that entail? I worked a lot with James Ngcobo, who directed me in a number of theatre productions, and later told me that from the second theatre production that we worked together on, he realized that I was a director because of how I approached my work. And so it took for someone else who is a theatre director to identify that inside of me and open up the opportunity to then say, here's a platform, here's a production, and direct a play. And in many ways, that is very similar to what Lara Foote received from Barney Simon, who one day said, Lara, here's a theatre production, direct. So I do think that what is needed for people to possibly get to the place that I'm at is somebody going, I see it in you, and opening it up. But the reality is, for us, or for me and for many Black South Africans, we only realize what some of these things mean as we're going along, on our journey.
In many ways, your journey is very similar to the one that I see myself taking. Just hearing you speak about your university experience and how you went in as an actor and came out as a director and so many other things, very, very similar to my experience. I had the opportunity to go to NYU, to Tisch School of the Arts to study. And at that moment, I thought acting is what I'm going to do, because the stage just frees me in a way that I've never felt in my own body and in my own space and in my own life here as an Indian, Kenyan, fourth generation African, fifth generation, sorry. So it's really, really interesting to hear that and kind of draw parallels in many ways between my journey and yours. And I think, even with our university experience, I find that from the way I've seen you work and just even how you've articulated your practice, articulated working with mentors in the field, it seems like you were given tools versus rules of, this is the way to do things. It feels more like it was a space where you were allowed to nurture yourself and develop your own practice, which was very similar for me. But one struggle as a younger, more emerging practitioner, director in the field for myself that I find is really this thing you've just mentioned of the mentorship. To think about female directors across Africa that I can look up to, that are easily accessible for me, that I could reach out to via email and say, hey, I want to learn everything from you, feels a bit like a struggle. I first felt that I was opened up into the sector and into the industry when I met you, who of course you come to become a very, very good friend and a close collaborator of mine. But I didn't feel that sense of openness up until I was able to interact with you, and you very openly said to me at the festival, yeah, let's talk, let's make things happen. You want to direct? This is what you got to do. So what advice would you have for young emerging directors in the field who are a bit shy, aren't yet sure of who to reach out to, how to reach out, how to make sense of this entire world? What advice would you have for them?
I think, wow. I think, firstly, people need to do the research. Go online, look at who's doing what, and just send an email. Because something that I've realized is we're often afraid of talking and engaging, but the reality is so many people are open. And the worst thing that they can say is no. And their no will probably be something like, you know, what, geez, what, you can't come sit in my theater rehearsal. That's maybe the worst no that they'll give you. But to talk and say, how did you get here? You'll find that a lot of people are willing to engage in that conversation and that discussion because they're aware of the fact that that is something that was lacking for them. And they're willing to give it back, to say, I know that I didn't have people that I could really have that conversation with, to say, how did you get there? What was it like? But at a festival, at a seminar, pick somebody and just go and say, hi, I really appreciated what you said. Please, can you tell me a little bit more? So there's no harm in asking. There's no harm in engaging. And that's what I would encourage, would be to, and advise is ask more. It's interesting you speak about my university degree and say that it seems like they were open. I think it's that I was open. I got to university understanding the fact that this was a dream come true. My mother had said no. And so now that I'm here, let me get my fingers into every single aspect and element of understanding what it is to be a creative. I studied music. It's interesting that I walked out as a musical theater actress, actually. I studied music. I walked in as a singer, but I knew I could act, and studied drama, and then delved in film and took every little bit of information that I could find that fooled me, and made me interested in this creative industry that I walked into. I really maintain I knew nothing about theater other than being on stage up until I went to university. And the more I discovered about theater, the more I wanted to know. And so I found different avenues to learn more about, and let me not say theater, storytelling. Because fundamentally, all that we're doing is storytelling. Whether you're singing, you're telling a story. If you're acting, you're telling a story. If you are directing on film or television, or acting on film, television, theater, you're telling a story. So I wanted to suck in as much as I possibly could about what goes into storytelling.
I have this image of you with like a little bag, like a pot that you're just carrying, and it's your toolkit. Oh, I'm going to pick this for film. I'm going to pick this from voiceover. I'm going to pick this from musical theater, and this is my Lesedi pot. So we're going to call it that, Lesedi pot of charms. That's what it is. Now that we've heard a little bit about your journey and how you've gotten to where you are, I'd love to learn more about your professional life. What festivals have you visited? KITF, but what other festivals have you visited? And what has your experience been there on the continent and then abroad? If you could compare the festivals you've been at, not to sound like this is an exam question, but compare and contrast to the festivals that you've been at on the continent versus internationally, and love to hear more about your varying experiences there.
So I think what's really interesting about my career, as you're speaking, I'm going, I haven't done anything. I'm like, what have you done, Lesedi?
You're superstar, that's what you are. But anyway.
Thank you. I'm not done yet. Look, I am still young in comparison to many other theatre makers in South Africa. I haven't, yes, in the past 3 years, I've directed 7 theatre productions, but and this is where I think South Africa, there's something we're missing out on as the younger generation in the theatre industry. South African theatre actors and directors, theatre makers, they used to travel with South African theatre. They would create a production at the market, and then they'd be at the Edinburgh Festival or another festival somewhere in Germany, et cetera, and they got to move around a lot. Theatre was made in such a way that 3 or 4 people came together, they rehearsed in their garage, and then they aimed to go to the National Arts Festival. And then from the National Arts Festival, they moved to another festival, and then suddenly they're overseas. And it came across as though they were just traveling and doing a lot of theater. Doesn't work like that anymore. You can do a production at the Market Theatre, you will start there, you will end there. So yes, I've done theatre work in South Africa, but my theatre work hasn't traveled as much as it possibly could have traveled. I've been to the National Arts Festival as a theatre actress in 2009. That was my first, that was my first time taking part in the National Arts Festival. And the National Arts Festival is the National Arts Festival in South Africa, the biggest. It is in Makanda, which was previously known as Grahamstown. That's where international producers come and watch work. The second time I went to the National Arts Festival was in 2014, and I was in Fishers of Hope, directed by Lara Foote. From there, we had international producers coming to watch, and we ended up going to the Vienna Festwochen in Vienna. Wiener, I think that's the pronunciation. But it was in Vienna, and then going to a Mannheim festival in Germany. Then from there, I went back to the National Arts Festival, having directed When Swallows Cry. But we were not part of the main festival. We were part of the Fringe, which is a smaller festival that has a turnaround time of like 3 productions in one space. You're in, you have a 1-hour turnaround time. The next production comes in. It's crazy. I can't stand festivals. They drive me crazy, honestly. I feel like I'm not present at all. And then taking part in Hilton Festival last year. Hilton is a festival in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, also quite small, works very much like the Fringe Festival in Grahamstown, where a production comes in, 1-hour turnaround time, the next production comes in. So you've got maybe 3 or 4 productions in one space. Then KITF, the Kampala International Theatre Festival, and going there twice in 2018, taking When Swallows Cry, and then again last year, mentoring directors with the Nairobi Musical Theatre Initiative. And then I've taken When Swallows Cry to other space. It wouldn't be festivals, but that is a piece of work that has traveled. We've been, we've managed to take part in the Geneva Peace Week. We were part of a festival in Nanjing, a university festival in Nanjing. And I think the reason why we were able to get that work to Stockholm, to Malmo, to Ethiopia was actually through Mike van Gaan. So he's the playwright, and he also works as an activist. And because he wrote the play, he was able to get this work around the world to be seen as part of a performance piece inside a conference, but not really a theatre festival. So honestly, the theatre festivals that I've done is the National Arts Festival, the Hilton Festival, and the Kampala International Theatre Festival. Generally, festivals are stressful, but I think an amazing platform to engage with other artists, to see what works other people are creating out there. And there's something interesting about a festival. When you go to a festival, you will realize what is going on in the world. For some reason, all of the pieces at a festival will somehow tie in with a political movement or gripe that people have around the world. And you almost feel exhausted after watching all of those plays, because you go, I was dealing with one issue in my work, but it feels like everybody else is dealing with this issue in their work, those are the festivals that I've taken part in. I do want to touch on the Kampala International Theatre Festival. And I think South Africa is a very interesting country because on the one hand, we're able to pitch things at the highest level. But the truth is that not everybody has access to that. Not everybody will go to a theatre festival like the National Arts Festival. And we then don't necessarily have smaller festivals that are little pockets that people can take their work to. We're always aiming high, you know. And going to the Kampala International Theatre Festival, for me, it was a festival that spoke to a people. It spoke to a space and going, here we are, here is a platform, bring your work. We're not pitching it so high that not everybody has access to it. And we will make things available to you so that you take your work and fit into our festival. We're not going to give you this amazing platform for you to do your work and accommodate you, because the reality is we can't. And this is where South Africa sits, in that if your production is not of that level, is not of that quality, you might not be a part of that festival. But Kampala International Festival says, we've got the space, we're here, we're open, and bring your work. We'll try and accommodate you, you know. But more than that, let's be about being a community of artists continentally and internationally in getting work out there and talking about what's happening with theatre globally.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. It's really, really interesting just thinking about access, right? Access in performance, not only from the perspective of the LGBTQ community and access in terms of folks with disabilities, but I think for us on the continent, access has a whole other meaning, which is this idea of which rung, so to speak, or which point of the pyramid does your work fit into? And I think for a global audience, there's always this expectation that there's supposed to be a certain type of production quality to your work, which sometimes, in my opinion, is over-aggrandized, where actually this performance, regardless of where it stands, is still delivering the message. It is still as powerful. It is still getting the story across. So, you know, I think we have a very innovative way of using our resources in the production side of things. Speaking from my producing perspective, in both the Kampala International Festival and both the Nairobi Musical Theatre Initiative, one of the biggest learning moments for me, and just having this conversation with you has made me realize it even more, is that we're very creative in the way we find our resources and apply them to accommodate the artistic base, right? I feel like there's a certain structure that is followed in producing around the world, but because the grants that we apply for are all coming from abroad, because the funding opportunities are not necessarily local and homegrown, we find our other ways of making our commercial producing model much more sustainable locally. And that includes creative uses of set design and using other forms of bringing people together, which is very exciting to me. It's like this example that I like to give, where we used to, when I grew up as a dancer, that's how I got into the arts. And when we were limited for funding, instead of building this massive stage for a production, we would just take empty beer crates and then cover it with wood and then cover it with cloth, and that's it. That was our little performance patio stage thing, and that's where we would perform. Our feet would be wasted, but that's okay.
So this for me, Karishma, is where I go, that is African authenticity. That is the difference between the West and Africa. I grew up playing a game called Mgusha. Now that, to give it a Western context, would be like England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, which is, you know, you take, so for Mgusha, it was basically stockings that are cut up and you tie them up. Two people stand on the other side and you jump in on the one side, you jump out, you make a shape on the one side and you jump out on the other side. But I didn't grow up playing with toys. Playing meant being outside on the street, finding stones, finding sticks, finding whatever you can, and creating a game, right? And in many ways, that's some kind of performance, and that's a creativity, right? So that's what makes us different when we then get into these spaces of trying to create work or tell stories. It's that we don't always rely on the grand set that will tell the story for us, as well as the actors that tell the story. Somehow, that performance from the actors becomes the centerpiece of storytelling for Africans. Because also, we come from this place of being storytellers within ourselves. One of the courses, so for my thesis in university, I did this comparison of musicals, and I looked at musical theater, and I looked at the history of musical theater, and I got lots and lots of books that told me about how Broadway started and got to becoming Broadway. Oh! And then I went, okay, that's great. Where's the history of South African theater? Where did it start? And then I read the books that spoke about the Barney Simons and spoke about the Manny Mannums and all the different white theater makers. And then I went, okay, yes, great. But where did theater start in Africa? What was theater? Before you tell me about a stage, because absolutely theater, we have all come to understand that in that sense, having a stage, having lights, having an audience, that is Western theater. That is the definition of theater according to the Western world. That's what we've been given. But what is the definition of theater according to Africans? And I started doing research, and theater has been defined as anything where there is an audience and there is a performer. And you realize that it's not even South Africans, Africans have always been theater makers. It's not something that's written in a book. It's not, a structured history like the Broadway history of theater or even operas. It's just people sitting, listening to someone telling a story. And from that, I then started realizing that, okay, now as an African, what would constitute my African storytelling, and had to start digging into that space. And that's why, our heart as African storytellers is its simplicity of just telling a story, of being creative. And some of the things that and I want to be so careful with what I'm saying, right? Because some of the stuff that we do in theater as Africans comes about and someone goes, wow, that's so amazing and so creative. But the reality is there's no money. And so somebody has had to go, because I don't have money, how do I make this work? So where there will be a budget that gives us so many different things to create this production, sometimes we don't have that. And how do we then make the story? Or how do we tell the story using what we have available to us, And I think that's why I go, South Africa is such an interesting place, because on the one hand, we have the ability to tell these grand stories, but somehow South Africa still, within its theater, focuses on the importance of the actor telling the story. So for example, When Swallows Cry, when we did the first production of When Swallows Cry, we had a TV monitor, we had a projector, we had a lighting design with pin spots and haze that created the illusion of prison bars. But when we went to the Kampala International Theatre Festival, we didn't have the ability to do all of that. We had one space. But at the heart of creating When Swallows Cry, it was always one space that turned into 3 different continents. And me as the director going, how do we do that? What do I do with these actors to get them to be in Africa in this scene and have my audience go, oh, they're in Africa, to then have them in Australia in the next scene and go, oh, they're in Australia, and then go, they're in North America in the third scene, and you go, oh, they're in North America. This is amazing. And for me, that's where I think I tapped into something, you know, people would say, oh, it's a genius. I don't know. For me, I feel like that was my authenticity as an African, because I went back to going, when I played as a child and there were no toys, and I needed to pretend that I was wherever it is that I was, how did I do that? And because I'd done it before, I could do it again and will be able to do it over and over and over and over again, because that is what is authentic in my storytelling. And I love the fact that you go, when I started dancing, this is how we did it. As Africans, the reality is things are not available in the same way as the West world, and you will, Western world. So you will make do with what you've got. And then that becomes exciting. But in many ways I go, it is exciting, but it sits so deeply in who it is that we are as Africans.
Everything you're saying is such gold, and I have so many questions and I have so many responses. So I'm going to try and articulate everything that I want to say in response and everything that I want to ask in response a bit more, you know, in a more structured way. I just want to add one thing in response to what you've said about the authenticity of being African. When you were talking about your thesis research, the first thing that came to mind, surprisingly, I also did something similar. Like I wrote 2 theses on the research that I was doing was looking at Yoruba masquerade and how that in itself is a form of storytelling beyond, it doesn't use theater, it is a form of, you know, what they would call street theater, but people are walking down the roads, the spirit comes to life within this character. And I used rasa, which is an aesthetic theory that comes out of the Indian subcontinent, to analyze Yoruba masquerade, to understand it better, because of course previously it's only been looked at through the lens of catharsis. And because it's looked at from the lens of catharsis, it's seen as not theater, because there's no climax and there's no denouement is what I used to call it, denouement, and there's no falling action and whatnot. So the one thing that it made me realize was, hi, I think we lost power. I'm continuing the recording. I
love it.
Should we keep this? Should we cut it out? What should we do?
Have to keep it. We decided to record this because maybe there'd be load shedding and the universe went, hello, whether you record or do it live.
It's gonna happen either way. Anyway, I guess we'll keep it then. So yeah, what I was saying is, that research in itself made me realize that theater is a way of life for us. It's not a separate career or a separate something. We are born dancing. We are born making plays with music. We are born with that inherent sense of, I know how to tell this story because my ancestors are living through me as I say it. You know, there is an inherent spiritual, ritualistic nature to be able to tell this kind of story. And I saw that so much in your work with When Swallows Cry, and having had the pleasure of being mentored by you as a young director as well, just in understanding your own practice, that is something that has really stuck out to me. I've always remembered you asking me the question, what's the point of the story? Why are you telling the story? What's the point and how are you going to do it? Yes.
Like something I was out.
Yeah, right, Karishma. What's the point of the story? Why the hell are you telling it? So I guess these are my 2 questions. One is a bit more idealistic and one is about that specific experience of KITF and working with When Swallows Cry. I know that it was a cast of 3 men and you were the female director. So my first question is, what was that like? Being a Black woman, being the only woman in the room, and then being supposedly the person with the most power as the director. What did that dynamic look like? And my second question, and I'll pose it now, and then I'd love to hear your response, is you've spoken about we make do with what we have as resources to make plays happen, to make work happen, to tell stories. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that in the world, until there's no glitz and glam, there's no production opportunity. How will those authentic, how do you imagine these authentic stories, just the meat and the juice of it all, being appreciated on a global theater canon if we expect production value to still be so high?
Okay, wow, beautiful, beautiful questions. Okay, the first one, and this is so brilliant that you're asking me this, directing 3 men and referencing KITF as well, right? Because I have an amazing story about KITF. Right. Look, the experience was amazing. The first thing I learned about When Swallows Cry, which started from the male director, I mean, not male director, the male playwright. Men speak saying one thing, but hold 5 million different meanings within it, right? And we can go into a whole conversation about gender, but we're not going to go there, and I will break it down quite simply. Men are pushed to work off of ego, women off of emotion, right? So because of ego, it means there's always a front, but ego does not mean there's no emotion. And similarly, emotion just allows for ego to be expressed or to be removed. And obviously, as women or young girls are always encouraged to speak your feelings and talk about how you're feeling. And young boys are always told not to, right? But what I've also observed recently through my nephew, who's a 4-year-old little boy, he has not been told that he can't express himself, but he can't express himself. It takes him longer to express and find the words for his emotions. So what happened with When Swallows Cry being written by a male playwright who wrote an action film? I always said that when you read that play, it's just action, violence. Then this guy's beating this guy up, and then that guy's beating this guy up, and they're saying a lot of things. And that's how that play could have looked. But having a woman who understands or has the ability to use her emotional language, I read between the lines and found the emotion for these men. And what I realized was that all human beings have emotion and have the ability to express their emotion. So you've got to pull it out of, I guess, the male actor and the male characters to go, what does that mean? So when they'd say a line, I'd always say, this is not a line that doesn't have context. You are a person in a desperate situation. How do you feel? And whenever I'd use the word feel, they'd look at me like I just swore at them, or they didn't know what I was talking about. They'd be like, you're asking me about my feelings. What is that? Enough, I used to say, okay, what's your opinion? You must have an opinion about this. And then they'd start talking. And from that, we found the vulnerability of the male characters, the emotion of these male characters. We did extensive emotional work with the actors that we kept safe and private, where I remember I made them do an exercise that I said, I would like you to betray yourself. And what I meant by that was, if you are a man, almost instinctively, you have to protect. So I need you to work against that. Almost instinctively, you want to stand up and bring bravado. I need you to work against that, because life, and in this situation, and these characters, they're not there. So I'm asking for another level and layer of vulnerability. So come into that space and then explain to yourself as an actor that as this character, I've betrayed myself, but as a man in my personal life, I haven't. So it was stripping them bare of all ego, of all bravado, and going to a very vulnerable place that men have the ability to go to. But unfortunately, society doesn't allow them to go there. So having someone that gave them permission to go there and asked them to go there and said, if you go there, you will give your best performance. The male actors were able to go there. And it is something that has been said that When Swallows Cry, had it been directed by a male director, it would have been very different. It would not necessarily have had the same amount of emotion and vulnerability and visceral human experience as it did having been directed by a female. So I took that on. People constantly said, how does it feel being the woman in the leadership role? And I feel like people wanted me to come with this very super aggressive stance because now the woman is in charge. And I used to say, I am the director. Already, by mere fact that I am the director of this production, I am the leader. I don't need to do anything more other than lead this process and facilitate it from whichever angle I need to facilitate it from. I do believe male actors are like children and they don't listen. And you'll say things to them over and over and over again, and you see them switch off, and you know they're not listening, but you go, it's fine. I will say the same thing tomorrow, and I will say the same thing on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, etc. Now, the KITF experience, it is foreign seeing a woman, a Black woman in a position of being a director. And I remember when we got to the festival, the tech team made up of Black Ugandan men was sitting, and I think they were shocked that the director is a woman. So when I walked in and the guys walked in, and they started doing something really amazing because they started to observe how I was treated and realized that people are undermining our director. We take her seriously. And this wasn't just happening, this was happening over and over and over and over again. That for them, they're going, this is our leader. This is the person we look up to, who has taken us on this journey. But when we walk into certain spaces, people look at this woman and go, oh no, she must be the stage manager. And I'm not going to walk in and shout to prove my position as the theater director. I am that. And they look at me and they do things, and then the actors would often go, yes, ma'am. Yes, my leader, to make people aware that that woman there that you are undermining is the director. So in Kampala, these Ugandan men are sitting there, and I go, guys, sorry, can we start doing the lighting cues? And they look at me and they go, we're going to eat first. So I was like, okay, I know what's happening here. And I just didn't fight it. And what was interesting was seeing my actors step in. And by the virtue of the fact that they were giving me acknowledgement and authority, it forced the other guys to acknowledge me. It forced them to feel a particular way, almost embarrassed that, sure, we're not acknowledging this woman in the way that she should be acknowledged. And then it was me. Look, when I'm stressed, I forget about a lot of things, and I start being a bully so that my work can get done. So eventually it was me speaking to the male tech team and going, I don't know why you think you know my show better than me. You will press the button when I say press the button. And they didn't get offended. They actually respected that. They were like, wait, she is actually telling us what to do. So we will respect that because clearly she knows what she wants and what she's doing. And by the end, I would stand running the show with the Kampala team, the two Ugandan guys, and they'd be like, yeah, we're doing it, right? Are we on? Are we ready? And I was like, yeah. So those are my experiences being a woman in a leadership role, that because I haven't second guessed myself,
right.
I've been taken seriously. And I've not come in having to prove a point to anybody, right? And I think mainly I've worked off of one thing: I'm a leader, regardless of my gender, and I know how to lead, and I play according to that. The second thing about the glitz, the glamour, and how we create theater. And I love the fact that you spoke about ritual. There's something that I am anti by virtue of the fact that I am African, there is an element of me that has tradition, culture, and elements of ritual. I do not have to portray that to show that something is African. I studied theater, and I studied very much a Western form of theater. Inherently, though, I understand elements of storytelling that are outside of the Western theater structure. In my family, we can be sitting and we will break out in song, and everybody will find perfect harmony. That is theatrical. That is a musical in and of itself. We cannot justify, and people will often go, it's even a joke within the South African, and I think it's Africans in general. We sing when we're happy, we sing when we're sad, we sing all the time, we dance all the time, and people will go, oh, why are they singing? Oh, why are they dancing? We just are, because that's who we are as a people, as Africans. So in my work, there will always be music. There will always be a sound that captures something above me, because I am rooted in things that are bigger and outside of me, be it a God, be it my ancestors, but it'll find its way in my work, and I will not justify it. And that's maybe sometimes something that somebody will go, wow, that's amazing creatively, cool, but I know what I found in that space. It's interesting that we are pushed to find glitz and glamour. And the reality is glitz and glamour that we don't find is costly, and often when we create certain works as Africans, we will create things because of a limited budget. And what I find interesting as well is that when we do get the budget to create the glitz and the glamour, I think sometimes we get caught up in the glitz and glamour and forget the heart of what it is that we do, which is just to tell a story and find the authenticity of the story. And the authenticity is the people. So I don't know what the solution is in terms of how we create work that will be taken seriously, even though it doesn't have the glitz and the glamour. The reality is, and it's something that South Africa does, where South Africa performs Broadway musicals. They are Broadway, they're not ours. There's a way, and I take my hat off to all South Africans that perform in Broadway musicals. But when you see Hamilton being performed by an all-American cast, it will always be better than what we can do, because it is authentic to those people and their way of telling stories as Americans. South Africa has created musicals, Marikana, Sarafina, and they hold their own narrative, their own structure, their own beauty, and we must never lose that. And interestingly enough, a simple production like Sarafina went to be performed on Broadway. So it's not to say we do not have what it takes to be on Broadway, but I think we need to be careful as Africans to aim for that. We need to find a way of aiming for something within our means and our, and I want to be careful with saying within our means, because people will go, so what, as Africans, we must be simple and we mustn't have the glitz and the glamour. No, we must. But we can't have glitz and glamour according to America or Europe. It's theirs. They do it best. So how do we find the glitz and glamour for ourselves? It's the same way that if you look at a traditional Xhosa wedding, it has its own elegance within the traditional wear, within how things are done. It has its own grand scale within the fact that everybody is invited, the amount of food that is prepared. But now when you compare it to a white wedding, it'll look like it's less, because it doesn't have certain elements that are Western, but it's just as grand, it's just as glamorous, it's just as glitzy, but in its own way. So I'm going, maybe we need to aim for our glitz and glamour that makes sense to who we are as Africans. Make it work according to ourselves. because this is where we will fail. We will create, and it's the thing that happens in South Africa. The South Africans that perform in a Broadway musical, those actors are never going to go to Broadway to go and perform that musical on Broadway. That's the reality. So and it's something that, I know that James has managed to do it with Songs of Migration, which is about the songs of migration of Africans in South Africa. And that piece was performed in DC. It's Gregory Maqoma who manages to sell out in Paris and in London when he's doing a piece about the Xhosa people. It's a dance piece, and has found a way to balance the ballet with the Xhosa traditional, with lighting that is not necessarily at that scale of a London production, but it's within a South African context with elements that go, how do I create an African sunset, an African sunrise with lighting? That is glamorous. And nobody will be able to create that other than an African. I've got an image from Kampala, actually, that I was like, flip, nothing beats an African sunset. It's got dusk, it's got so many different layers from the landscape. You see it only on this continent. Now create that on stage and you've blown people away. So that's what I think we need to do within our storytelling when we are creating the glitz and glamour. We cannot create glitz and glamour at the level of an America and a Europe. We're not there yet. But how do we take what we have and create it and go, this is who we are? And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying as Africans, we are rich as a people. And if we can use that richness as a people to tell our stories, I think we're going to get somewhere.
I'm taking so much from this. I'm taking empowerment, I'm taking inspiration, I'm taking, embracing your identity, owning it, and telling the story the way you know how to tell it best, because nobody else knows how to tell it the way we do. And that is going to stick with me, from our conversation today till the end of time, because I think that's what makes us unique as humans. The way our hair is done is different. The clothes we wear are different. The shape of our nose is different. Just like that, the way we tell stories are different. Lesedi, thank you so much for being such a wonderful, wonderful person, human, spirit, and artistic colleague. It's been such a pleasure always just talking to you and riffing off ideas and having you as a sounding board. Just, I feel really lucky to be in the generation that I am in, because it's people like yourself that are paving the path for us. And somewhat making it somewhat easier for us to get into the scene, because you're welcoming us with open arms and saying, yes, here it is. Yes, there's a lot more work to do, but when we put our hands together and we join them, it takes two to clap. So really, thank you.
It's my pleasure. I love that you say it takes two to clap, because I think as Africans, we are about a sense of community. Yeah. We never believe that we can do things on our own. And so also thank you for having this conversation with me, because I could not say this without you. So thank you very much, Karishma. And I look forward to our journey, going forward, to see how we continue to collaborate as Africans, because I think that's also important. Africa is not just South Africa. Africa is a large continent made up of many different countries, So
we just got to keep watching this space.
Absolutely.
Asante sana. Thank you, my dear. Sending you a lot of love. And thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for being engaged with us for the last hour. Feel free to connect with Utopia Theatre, follow their social media. And if you want to reach out to us, you can get our contacts from them too. Thank you.
Cheers.